More than 2,000 years ago, a man looked at the universe and said, "There are no gods controlling this. There is no fate woven by divine hands. There is no immortal soul awaiting judgment. There is no cosmic purpose guiding existence. There is only this: atoms and void, invisible particles, indivisible, eternal, colliding in infinite darkness, without plan, without intention, without mercy. Everything you see, touch, love, fear is merely a temporary arrangement of matter. Your body, your thoughts, your consciousness. Atoms in motion, nothing more. And when you die, the atoms scatter. You cease to exist completely, forever." This idea, brutal, cold, shockingly modern, didn't come from a 20th century scientist. It came from a Greek philosopher, born over 2,400 years ago, in an age when the entire world believed in capricious gods, unchangeable fates, and eternal souls. His name was Democritus, and the story you're about to hear was nearly erased from human memory. Why? Because what he discovered was far too dangerous. To understand what Democritus did, you first need to understand the world into which he was born. We are in the 5th century before Christ. Greece is not a unified nation. It's an archipelago of city-states, each with its own laws, its own customs, its own gods. Athens is beginning to experiment with democracy. Sparta trains warriors from childhood, and everywhere, religion isn't a personal choice. It's the invisible fabric holding society together. The gods are in everything. Zeus controls the lightning, Poseidon stirs the seas. Demeter makes the wheat grow. Every natural phenomenon, every unexplainable event, every human tragedy or triumph, all of it is attributed to divine will. There is no separation between the sacred and the everyday. To offend the gods means risking the destruction of the entire city. And the fundamental questions: where do we come from? What are we made of? Where are we going? Have ready-made answers. The myths explain, the priests interpret. To question too much is dangerous. But something was changing. On the fringes of the Greek world, far from the great centers of power, a group of men began doing something revolutionary. They looked at the universe and, instead of asking, "Which god did this?" they asked, "How does this work?" They were the pre-Socratics, natural philosophers, thinkers who sought to explain material reality without resorting to the supernatural. Thales of Miletus said everything was made of water. Anaximander proposed an indefinite substance, the apeiron. Anaximenes bet on air. Heraclitus saw fire as the fundamental principle. Parmenides argued that change was an illusion, and that only immutable being was real. Each of them was groping in the dark, trying to find the primordial substance, that from which all things are made. None of them got it entirely right, but they were asking the right question, and that question, what is material reality really, was about to receive an answer that would take millennia to be taken seriously. That answer would be born in a city called Abdera, a city the Athenians considered provincial, almost barbaric, a city from which no one expected anything important to emerge. It was there that Democritus was born, and it was there that he would meet the man who would plant in his mind the seed of an idea that would change everything. Abdera lay in the far north of Greece, in the region of Thrace. A port city, prosperous from trade, but culturally despised by the Athenians. To the inhabitants of sophisticated Athens, the Abderites were synonymous with stupidity. Jokes about the idiocy of Abdera's residents circulated like common currency at Athenian symposia. It was in this unlikely city that Democritus was born, around 460 BCE. His family was wealthy. Some ancient sources claim his father was so rich that he once hosted King Xerxes of Persia himself during the invasion of Greece. Whether true or exaggerated, The fact remains that Democritus grew up with something rare for the time: resources. And with resources came the possibility of something even rarer: time to think. But wealth alone doesn't explain what he would become. What explains it is an encounter. At some point during Democritus's youth, a strange man arrived in Abdera, a philosopher from another Ionian city carrying ideas that sounded like madness. His name was Leucippus. We know almost nothing about Leucippus. He is a ghost in the history of philosophy. Some ancient sources even doubted whether he existed at all. But most scholars agree. Leucippus was real, and it was he who first formulated the hypothesis that Democritus would transform into a complete system, the hypothesis of atomism. Leucippus looked at the endless debate of the pre-Socratics: water, air, fire, the indefinite, immutable being, and proposed something radically different. What if reality wasn't made of a single transformable substance? What if, instead, there existed countless minimal particles, indivisible, eternal? The Greek word is atomos, literally, that which cannot be cut, atoms and void. That was the proposal: solid particles moving through infinite empty space. Nothing more. The idea was elegant and disturbing, because if everything is made of atoms, then everything can be explained by the movement and combination of these particles. There is no need for gods manipulating the elements. There is no need for mysterious forces. Just matter in motion, following mechanical laws. Democritus absorbed this idea, and he decided to dedicate his life to developing it. But he didn't stay in Abdera, waiting for knowledge to come to him. With his father's inheritance, Democritus did something extraordinary for the time. He traveled for decades. Ancient sources differ on the details, but agree on the scope. Democritus supposedly visited Egypt, where he studied geometry with the priests. He reportedly went to Persia, where he came into contact with the Magi and their astronomical traditions. Some accounts place him in India, learning from the gymnosophists, the naked sages whom the Greeks associated with extreme ascetic practices. Others situate him in Ethiopia, Babylon, everywhere there was knowledge to be absorbed. How much of this is literally true? Impossible to know, but what these stories reveal is a reputation. Democritus was seen by the ancients as a man of encyclopedic knowledge, a thinker who wasn't content with the wisdom of his own culture, an investigator who sought to understand everything: geometry, astronomy, biology, ethics, language, perception, music, agriculture, medicine. Diogenes Laertius, the ancient biographer of philosophers, lists more than 60 works attributed to Democritus. 60. On virtually every field of human knowledge available at the time. Almost none survived intact. We have only fragments, second-hand quotations, references from other authors, pieces of a gigantic puzzle, most of the pieces lost forever. But what survived is enough to understand the magnitude of what Democritus built. He didn't merely accept Leucippus's hypothesis. He transformed it into a complete world-view, an explanation for everything, from the formation of worlds to the nature of the soul, from the origin of sensations to the possibility of knowledge, from the structure of matter to the pursuit of human happiness, all derived from a single premise: atoms and void. Nothing else exists. And it was this premise that set Democritus on a collision course with nearly everything the ancient world believed. To understand the audacity of Democritus's system, you need to understand what he was rejecting. In the Greek world, reality was populated by forces: gods as spirits, fate, cosmic purpose. Every tree might harbor a nymph, every river had its divinity. Thunder was the voice of Zeus, madness was divine possession. Disease could be punishment from the gods or an imbalance of mystical humors. Nothing happened by mechanical chance. Everything had meaning, intention, a will behind it. Democritus looked at this enchanted world and said, "No, there are no hidden forces, there are no cosmic intentions, there is no purpose woven into the fabric of reality. There is only this, eternal, indivisible particles moving through infinite void, colliding, aggregating, separating, forming worlds, bodies, minds, and then dispersing once again." Democritus's physics was of brutal simplicity. Atoms are infinite in number, eternal, uncreated, and indestructible. They differ from one another only in shape, size, and spatial arrangement. Some are smooth, others rough. Some round, others angular. Some fit together easily, others repel each other. The void, empty space, is as real as the atoms themselves. Without the void, there would be no movement, and without movement, there would be no change, no combination, no world. Atoms move eternally through the void, not because some external force propels them, but because movement is their primordial nature. They have always moved, they always will. When atoms collide, sometimes they aggregate. Their shapes interlock, forming stable structures. These structures are the objects we perceive: a rock, a tree, a human body. Everything is merely a temporary arrangement of atoms. And when the arrangement falls apart, the atoms disperse and form other things. Nothing is created, nothing is destroyed, only recombined, eternally. This was revolutionary. But Democritus went further, much further. He applied atomism to everything. Perception, atoms. When you see an object, what actually happens is that extremely thin films of atoms detach from that object's surface, travel through the air, and strike your eyes. You don't see the thing itself. You see an atomic copy of it. Every sense works this way. Smell consists of atoms entering through the nose. Sound is air, agitated by atoms in motion. Taste depends on the shape of atoms touching your tongue. Angular atoms produce bitter taste. Round atoms produce sweet taste. The soul? Atoms. For Democritus, the soul was not an immaterial substance, a divine breath, an entity separate from the body. The soul was made of atoms, especially fine, spherical, mobile atoms. Fire atoms, spread throughout the body, responsible for movement and life. When you die, these atoms disperse. There is no survival. There is no afterlife. The soul simply ceases to exist as a coherent arrangement. The gods? Here Democritus was strategically ambiguous. He did not explicitly deny the existence of gods. That would have been social suicide in ancient Greece. But his explanation was devastating. The gods that humans perceive are, in reality, large atomic structures that exist in space. Sometimes, images of these structures reach us in dreams or visions. They are real in a certain sense, but they are not supernatural. They are just more atoms, and they do not control the universe. The universe needs no control. Worlds form naturally. Atoms in motion collide, aggregate, form vortices in the void. Gradually, these vortices organize themselves. Heavy atoms sink to the center. Light atoms remain at the periphery. An earth forms, a sun forms, stars form, and there is not just one world, there are infinite worlds. In the infinite void, with infinite atoms in eternal motion, countless worlds form, flourish, and are destroyed simultaneously. Some of these worlds may have suns and moons like ours. Others may be completely different. Somewhere in the infinite, at this very moment, worlds are being born. Somewhere else, worlds are dying. There is no center of the universe. There is no privileged place. There is no cosmic purpose guiding the formation of worlds. Just atoms in motion, following blind mechanical laws. This vision was astonishingly modern. Democritus was describing, 2,400 years ago, something that sounds disturbingly similar to contemporary physics. Fundamental particles. Movement in void. conservation of matter, multiple worlds, absence of cosmic teleology, mechanical explanation of all phenomena. And he didn't stop at physics. Democritus's atomism had profound ethical implications. If there are no gods controlling our fate, if there is no immortal soul awaiting judgment, if everything is matter in motion, then how should we live? Democritus's answer was surprisingly serene. He developed an ethics based on tranquility. The Greek term is euthymia, equanimity, a serene spirit, stable contentment. For Democritus, the goal of life was not to accumulate wealth, achieve glory, or please the gods. It was to reach an inner state of peace, moderation, and balance. Fear of death. Irrational. When you die, you simply cease to exist. There is no pain, no consciousness, no hell waiting. Death is merely the dispersal of the atoms that compose you. Why fear nothingness? Fear of the gods? Equally irrational. The gods, if they exist, do not interfere in human affairs. There is no divine punishment awaiting you. Live with moderation, seek simple pleasures, avoid excesses that disturb the soul, and you will find serenity. Democritus was known as the laughing philosopher. While Heraclitus was remembered as dark and pessimistic, Democritus supposedly laughed at human folly, at vain concerns, at the irrational fear that enslaves mankind. He had found a way to live without illusions and still find peace. But that peace would not be granted to his legacy. Because while Democritus was developing his worldview in Abdera, something was happening in Athens that would change the course of Western philosophy forever. A man named Socrates was asking questions in the public squares, and one of his students was about to construct a system that would bury atomism for 2 millennia. Democritus and Socrates were contemporaries. Think about that for a moment. While Democritus was developing a materialist physics, a cosmology of infinite worlds, a mechanical explanation of reality, Socrates was walking through the streets of Athens asking, what is justice? What is virtue? What is the good? 2 radically different paths, 2 opposing ways of doing philosophy. Democritus looked outward, at nature, at atoms, at the material structure of the cosmos. Socrates looked inward, at the human soul, at moral concepts, at self-knowledge. There's a disturbing detail recorded by Diogenes Laertius. Democritus supposedly visited Athens at some point in his life, and, according to his own account, no one recognized him. I went to Athens, Democritus reportedly said, and no one knew me. Some historians interpret this as modesty, others as veiled resentment, but most likely it's simply the truth. Athens didn't care about the philosopher from Abdera. The intellectual center of the Greek world was fascinated by other questions, ethical, political, rhetorical questions. The investigation of material nature seemed like the business of provincial thinkers, of outdated physicists. Socrates, in fact, had explicit contempt for natural philosophy. In the Platonic dialogues, he makes clear that he abandoned such investigations while still young, studying atoms, elements, the origin of the cosmos. None of this helped anyone live better. The only investigation that mattered was the investigation of the soul. But it wasn't Socrates who destroyed Democritus's legacy. Socrates wrote nothing. Socrates was executed. It was his most brilliant student who did the work, Plato. Plato didn't ignore Democritus. Plato hated him. This hatred is visible through a glaring absence. Plato wrote extensively about the pre-Socratic philosophers. He mentions Thales, Heraclitus, Parmenides, and Anaxagoras. He discusses, criticizes, incorporates elements of their philosophies. But Democritus? In the entire Platonic corpus, Democritus is not mentioned a single time. Not once. This cannot be ignorance. Democritus was famous. He had written dozens of works. His ideas circulated widely. Plato certainly knew of him. So why the silence? There's an ancient account, possibly apocryphal but revealing. Diogenes Laertius tells us that Plato wanted to burn all the books by Democritus he could gather. 2 Pythagorean philosophers dissuaded him, arguing it would be pointless. The texts had already spread too far. Truth or legend, the story captures something real. Plato saw Democritus as an enemy, and it's not hard to understand why. Everything Plato believed, Democritus denied. For Plato, true reality was not material. The world we perceive through the senses, rocks, trees, bodies, is merely shadow, an imperfect copy. True reality resides in the forms, in the ideas, in immaterial and eternal entities that exist on a higher plane. The form of the good, the form of beauty, the form of justice. These are more real than any physical object. For Democritus, absurd. Only atoms and void exist. Plato's forms are fictions, empty words, conceptual phantoms. For Plato, the human soul was immortal and divine. Before birth, it contemplated the forms in the higher world. Knowledge is recollection, the soul remembering what it saw before incarnating. Death is not the end. It's the soul's liberation from its bodily prison. For Democritus, the soul is made of atoms. It dies with the body. There is no recollection, no contemplation of forms, no personal immortality. When you die, it's over. For Plato, the cosmos was ordered by divine intelligence. In the Timaeus, he describes a demiurge, a divine craftsman who shapes the universe according to a rational plan, looking to the eternal forms as his model. The cosmos has purpose, order, direction. For Democritus, there is no demiurge. There is no purpose. Worlds form through mechanical collision of atoms in the void. Order emerges from chaos with no mind guiding the process. The conflict was total, and Plato won. He didn't win by having better arguments. He didn't win because the evidence supported his immaterial forms more than Democritus's atoms. He won for other reasons. Plato founded the Academy, the first institution of higher learning in the West, which would last nearly 1,000 years. Plato trained generations of disciples. Plato wrote brilliant literary dialogues that combined philosophy with drama, vivid characters, engaging narrative. Plato was in Athens, the center of the Greek world. Democritus was in Abdera, writing technical treatises. Without a school, without an institution, without organized disciples. And then came Aristotle. Aristotle was Plato's student. He disagreed with his master on many points. He rejected the radical separation between forms and the sensible world, developed his own metaphysics, his own logic, his own physics. But on something fundamental, Aristotle followed Plato. Aristotle hated atomism. Not with Plato's disdainful silence. Aristotle attacked directly. In his works on physics, he dedicates long passages to refuting Democritus and Leucippus. He denies the existence of the void. For Aristotle, the void is logically impossible. He denies that the mechanical motion of atoms can explain the order of the cosmos. He insists that there must be final causes, purposes, teleology in nature. Why does a stone fall? For Democritus, because the atoms composing it are heavy and downward movement is their natural mechanical tendency. For Aristotle, because the stone seeks its natural place, the center of the universe. The stone has a purpose, even if unconscious. Why does the eye exist? For Democritus, because atomic arrangements that allowed vision conferred some survival advantage and perpetuated themselves. For Aristotle, because nature makes the eye so that we can see. Purpose comes first. Structure follows. Aristotle's physics was profoundly teleological. Everything in nature has an end, a goal, a reason for being. The cosmos is ordered, hierarchical, intentional. At the center lies the motionless earth. Around it, the celestial spheres, each moved by its own divine intelligence. At the top, the unmoved mover, pure thought thinking itself, the ultimate cause of all motion. It was a comfortable cosmos, a cosmos with room for gods, for purpose, for cosmic meaning, for the immortal soul. Democritus's atomism offered blind atoms colliding in infinite void. And when Christianity arrived, the choice was obvious. Christianity needed philosophy. In the first centuries of the Common Era, as the new religion spread throughout the Roman Empire, its thinkers faced a problem. The Christian faith had scriptures, had narratives, had moral commandments, but it didn't have a sophisticated philosophical structure to compete with Greco-Roman intellectual traditions. Educated pagans despised Christians as superstitious, illiterate, incapable of rational argument. The Christian response was to absorb Greek philosophy. But not just any philosophy. A choice was made, deliberate, consequential, lasting. Plato was baptized. Starting in the 2nd century, Christian thinkers like Justin Martyr, Clement of Alexandria, and Origen began fusing Platonism and Christianity. Plato's eternal forms became thoughts in the mind of God. The sensible world, a shadow of the true world, aligned perfectly with the Christian devaluation of the body in favor of the soul. The Platonic immortality of the soul fit with the doctrine of the afterlife. The demiurge transformed into the creator God. Augustine of Hippo in the 4th century completed the synthesis. Converted to Christianity, after years as a Manichaean, Augustine found in Plato, via the Neoplatonists, the conceptual tools he needed. His theology became the intellectual foundation of Western Christianity for nearly 1,000 years, and after Augustine came Thomas Aquinas. In the 13th century, Aristotle's texts, preserved by Arab translators, returned to Western Europe. The impact was seismic. Aristotle offered a complete system: logic, physics, biology, ethics, metaphysics, politics, all interconnected, all apparently demonstrable through reason. The Church initially resisted. Aristotle was pagan. Some of his ideas, such as the eternity of the world, directly contradicted Christian doctrine. But Thomas Aquinas accomplished a second great synthesis. He Aristotelianized Christianity. The proofs of God's existence, the doctrine of the soul as the form of the body, virtue ethics, the cosmology of celestial spheres. Everything was incorporated, baptized, harmonized with biblical revelation. The result was medieval scholasticism, an impressive intellectual edifice dominating European universities for centuries. And atomism. Atomism was incompatible. There was no room for blind atoms in a cosmos created by God with loving purpose. There was no room for a material soul in a religion that promised eternal life. There was no room for infinite worlds in a universe centered on earth, where Christ had incarnated once to save humanity. Democritus was not merely forgotten, he was actively rejected. His texts were not copied in medieval monasteries. His ideas, when mentioned, appeared as examples of pagan error. Atomism became synonymous with atheism, materialism, the denial of everything Christian civilization held sacred. For over 1,000 years, Democritus's thought existed only as fragment, quotation, historical curiosity. But true ideas are hard to kill. In the 1st century BCE, a Roman poet named Lucretius wrote a long philosophical poem, De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things. It was a passionate exposition of atomism, based not directly on Democritus, but on Epicurus, who had adapted and developed atomic theory a century after Democritus. Epicurus added something crucial to atomist physics. For Democritus, atoms fell in straight lines through infinite void. Epicurus introduced the clinomen, a spontaneous, minimal, unpredictable swerve. This random deviation allowed atoms to collide and form worlds. But more importantly, the clinomen preserved human freedom. If everything were absolute mechanical determinism, there would be no room for choice. The atomic swerve was the physical gap for freedom, so Lucretius transformed this physics into poetry. Elegant Latin verses describing atoms dancing in the void, worlds being born and dying, the mortality of the soul, liberation from fear of the gods and of death. Lucretius's poem survived by a thread, a single manuscript, found in 1417 by an Italian book hunter named Poggio Bracciolini in a dusty German monastery. The text had been forgotten for centuries. Poggio made copies. The copies circulated, and De Rerum Natura returned to the world. The impact was slow but profound. During the Renaissance, thinkers began looking again at the ancients, not just at Plato and Aristotle, but at the atomists. Giordano Bruno embraced the idea of infinite worlds and was burned by the Inquisition in 1600. Galileo studied Lucretius and developed a physics that treated matter as composed of particles. Pierre Gassendi in the 17th century attempted a synthesis of atomism and Christianity. And then came the scientists, Robert Boyle and his experiments with gases, Isaac Newton and his solid, massy, hard, impenetrable, movable particles, John Dalton and chemical atomic theory in the 19th century, Thomson, Rutherford, Bohr, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, and the quantum revolution that revealed the true structure of matter. Democritus wasn't completely right. Modern atoms are not indivisible. They're composed of protons, neutrons, electrons, quarks, a whole zoo of subatomic particles. The quantum void is not empty. It seethes with fluctuations, fields, energy. But the fundamental intuition was correct. Material reality is composed of discrete units. Matter is made of particles. Natural phenomena can be explained by mechanical processes without the need for divine intervention. The soul, if it exists as a distinct entity, depends on physical processes in the brain. Democritus's materialism, buried for millennia, reemerged as the metaphysical foundation of modern science. And Plato, Aristotle, the physics of immaterial forms, of cosmic purposes, of celestial spheres moved by divine intelligences. It crumbled, not through persecution, not by decree, simply because it didn't work. It didn't predict, didn't explain, didn't enable technology. Atoms worked. Cosmic purposes did not. The history of science is, in a sense, Democritus's posthumous revenge on Plato. But that revenge came with a price. You're reading this on a screen made of atoms. The photons striking your retina are emitted by LEDs composed of semiconductors. Precise arrangements of silicon, electrons jumping between energy levels, releasing light. Your brain processes these signals through electrochemical impulses. Ions crossing membranes, neurotransmitters bridging synapses, billions of neurons firing in patterns. Atoms, void, motion. Democritus would recognize the description, not the details, of course. He knew nothing of electrons, of quantum mechanics, of DNA's structure. But the fundamental premise, that material reality can be explained entirely by particles in motion with no need for supernatural forces, that premise is the same, and that premise won. Look around. Every technology sustaining modern civilization is a child of atomism. Computers, medicines, satellites, the screen you're staring at right now. All of it exists because, at some point, humanity decided to take seriously the idea that matter is made of particles obeying mechanical laws. The physics that makes microchips possible descends directly from a hypothesis formulated in Abdera 2,400 years ago. But how did this idea survive? How did it cross 2 millennia of oblivion? The path was tortuous. Democritus's atomism passed to Epicurus, who transformed it into ethics. Epicurus passed to Lucretius, who transformed it into poetry. Lucretius's poem survived by a thread, a single manuscript discovered in 1417 in a dusty monastery. From there, the idea spread through the Renaissance, infected Galileo, seduced Newton, and finally exploded into the scientific revolution. Every link in that chain was improbable. Any one of them could have broken, but none did. And now here we are, living in a world Democritus would recognize at its foundations, and one that raises the very same questions his ancient critics already pointed out. The central question is this: if everything is matter in motion, what's left for meaning? Plato and Aristotle argued that a cosmos without purpose is a cosmos without sense. If there's no intention behind reality, if there's no cosmic good organizing the universe, then human life becomes an accident, a temporary arrangement of particles soon to scatter into the void. Why be virtuous? Why seek knowledge? Why do anything at all if deep down we're just atoms blindly colliding? That objection never disappeared. It simply changed clothes. Today, some thinkers argue that scientific materialism, by discarding gods, souls, and cosmic purposes, left a void that modern civilization has failed to fill. The philosopher Charles Taylor calls this the disenchantment of the world. The sociologist Max Weber had already diagnosed, in the early 20th century, an age of rationalization that was driving mystery out of everyday life. Thinkers like Viktor Frankl, after surviving Auschwitz, devoted themselves to understanding how human beings find meaning in a seemingly indifferent universe. On the other side, some argue the opposite. Philosophers like Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, and other heirs of the scientific enlightenment maintain that meaning doesn't need to come from outside. It can be built from within. The beauty of the natural universe, connection with other human beings, the pursuit of knowledge, love. All of this remains available, even in a cosmos made only of atoms and void. The absence of cosmic purpose doesn't imply the absence of personal purpose. It implies, perhaps, greater responsibility. If no one is going to give your life meaning, you'll have to do it yourself. It's curious to note that this second position is very close to what Democritus himself defended. Democritus's ethics was an ethics of liberation through knowledge. Understanding the true nature of things frees you from irrational fears. You don't need to fear the gods. They're not paying attention. You don't need to fear death. It's simply the end of experience, and the end of experience cannot be experienced as bad. You don't need to accumulate wealth or glory. You and everyone around you are temporary arrangements of particles, and none of it will last. What matters then? For Democritus, the answer was euthymia, serenity, inner balance, tranquility of the soul. A life lived with moderation, reflection, and acceptance of impermanence. Democritus, according to ancient accounts, lived to a very advanced age, and he died at peace. He didn't need gods to find serenity. He didn't need an immortal soul to accept death. He didn't need cosmic purpose to live a life full of inquiry and knowledge. But he was Democritus, a singular genius with singular resources and temperament. The question that remains, 24 centuries later, is whether that answer works for everyone, whether an entire civilization can live under the materialist truth and still find reasons to get out of bed. We don't know the answer. The experiment is underway, and you're living in it right now. Democritus looked at the universe without asking permission. He saw atoms where others saw gods. He saw void where others saw destiny. He paid for it with centuries of oblivion, but truth doesn't care about credit. Truth crosses empires, bonfires, and silences. It made it all the way here. To you, to this screen made of atoms, contemplating a universe made of atoms. If reality is nothing but matter in motion, if there's no cosmic purpose, no immortal soul, then what do you do with your life? Democritus found serenity. Epicurus found pleasure. The Stoics found duty. Camus found revolt. And you, What will you build with your atoms? In the brief time they'll hold together,